Malik never imagined that a single slap could change his life. Ever since he lost his parents, pain had followed him like a shadow, lingering even in silence. But what he didn't realize was that the silence he clung to for protection was also his prison. At 16, he was tired of being invisible, tired of being the easy target for the school bullies who shoved him, hit him, and turned him into a joke. He didn't fight back, not because he didn't feel it, but because he believed nothing would ever change. The turning point came when he met Zeke, a man who, until then, had gone unnoticed, yet brought with him something Malik never expected: the quiet strength to stand tall in the face of pain. Zeke, with all his experience, knew that the real battle wasn't out there. It was inside Malik, and it was there, in that place where everything felt lost, that Malik's journey began. Not with shouting, but with steady action and a silent choice. But change wouldn't come easily. With every step forward, Malik would have to face not just the bullies, but his own vulnerability. The pain was still there, but now he had something more: the courage to fight for what he believed in. He knew the path ahead would be hard, but he could no longer keep hiding. It was time to become someone who didn't stay silent. Now, as the bullies watch and fear still tries to creep in, Malik is about to discover that true power isn't found in striking back, but in deciding who you want to be, without letting the past define your future. What happens when someone finally chooses to live? Malik is about to find out.
Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey.
Baltimore, the beginning of the semester. The morning heat couldn't lift the heavy atmosphere hanging over the school. Malik Sanders walked among the other students, invisible to most eyes. He was used to the taunts. They weren't just words. Shoves, quick slaps, the brutal sting of fingers against his skin. This was his daily reality. Sometimes the hits landed harder, more painfully, but silence always outweighed the pain. "Hey, boy!" A deep, grating voice sliced through the air. No surprise. Malik knew what came next: the muffled laughter, the shove to the back, the smack to the head. "You're asking for it, huh?" the voice sneered, as Trey's cold palm struck his face. Malik simply closed his eyes for a second, feeling the blood boil in his veins, but not a flicker of reaction. He didn't respond. He never did. And worse, he didn't feel anything anymore. His body, numbed to pain, stopped reacting. His heart, apathetic, sank into silence. At home, things were different. His grandmother, solid as ever with her quiet faith, was his foundation. Kendra, his cousin, tried every way she could to lift his spirits, using her poems like a shield. "Listen to this one, Malik," she'd say, eyes bright with hope, trying to pull a reaction from him. But Malik just listened, as if the words floated around him. Kendra's poems carried a kind of melancholy that reached him deeply, but never deep enough to erase the pain carved into his skin. At school, violence was routine. The shoves and slaps no longer shook him like they used to, but something inside was shifting. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, a defense against the endless storm. He felt a constant ache, an invisible wound he tried to hide. When people looked at him, they only saw his body, the color of his skin. They didn't see his soul, what the pain had done to him. He didn't know which was worse, the daily physical abuse or the deep, haunting silence that lived inside his heart. But something felt different that day. As he walked down the hallway, he felt the usual pain of being shoved. But this time, there was more. A pressure in his chest, growing heavier, like the pain was no longer willing to stay buried. It was about to break loose. When Trey smacked the back of his head again, something snapped inside him. For the first time, he didn't just feel pain. He felt something stronger, a quiet, burning rage. It wasn't just anger. It was the feeling that he was done staying silent, that he was ready to fight back against what he could no longer endure. When the new janitor arrived at the school, no one noticed. He was a man of quiet steps and an even quieter presence. Ezekiel Harris, an old man with graying hair and eyes that seemed heavy with untold stories, walked the hallways like a shadow, his only companion the sound of his broom sweeping away the remains of another chaotic school day. The kids passed him without a glance, as if he were part of the background, like a piece of furniture unworthy of attention. Zeke had grown used to it, the solitude, the silence, the erasure. Since his combat days, he had learned how to live unseen. His life was a collection of lost moments, broken promises, and glances that passed through him without a trace of empathy. No matter where he was, no one saw the man he truly was. They only saw the janitor, the old guy, the nobody. But then he saw Malik. During recess, when laughter and shouting echoed across the courtyard, Zeke noticed the boy pulling away from the others. The bullying, like some cruel routine, was in full swing. Malik, once again, was taking the hits. Shoves, mocking laughter, and then a final, brutal push that knocked him flat on his back. Zeke's blood boiled, not with anger, but with a familiar ache of injustice. He knew that pain well. He felt it every day, ever since the scars of his past taught him how to stay silent. At the end of the day, when the school was quiet again, Zeke found Malik alone in the courtyard. The boy sat by himself, his face a little bruised, but his expression was harder than the pain itself. He wasn't crying. He wasn't complaining. He was just sitting there on the edge of the courtyard, staring into nothing as if trying to vanish. Zeke, with his trained eyes, recognized that kind of silence. It was the kind of pain deeper than any physical wound. The pain of being forgotten, the pain of being invisible. Without a word, Zeke slowly walked over and sat beside Malik, not asking for anything, just being there. The silence between them was heavy, but it was full of unspoken understanding. Words weren't needed. Zeke was no longer a stranger to Malik. There was something in Zeke's eyes that said, "I know exactly how you feel." Zeke knew he couldn't let Malik go on like that. Not anymore. He knew that for this boy, silence had become a prison of the soul, and he couldn't bear to see another life swallowed up by the quiet of oppression. Malik's nights began to take on a new meaning. When the rest of the school was asleep, he would meet Zeke in the maintenance room. The place was cold and still, with the sound of wind tapping at the windows breaking the heavy silence between them. Zeke watched him with an unusual calm, as if he were waiting for something. When Malik walked in, Zeke didn't say a word. He simply pointed to the corner of the room where a set of training gloves and mats lay, neat, untouched, and ready. "We start from the beginning," Zeke said, his voice deep and deliberate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't talk much. But every word carried weight. Malik, guarded and unsure of what to expect, slipped on the gloves and stepped in front of Zeke. He felt fear, insecurity, the weight of everything behind him, but also something unfamiliar, the sense that this could be more than just physical training. It could be the beginning of something changing inside him. "You don't need anger to fight, Malik, you need control," Zeke said, stepping into stance. His movements were smooth, yet incredibly firm. The old man, fragile in appearance, carried a strength Malik never imagined. With every move, he wasn't just learning Hapkido, he was learning about himself. Every strike, every block peeled back a layer of something deeper, control over a life that had always felt out of reach. "Anger will make you lose control," Zeke continued, calmly correcting Malik's form. "You can be strong, but you have to learn how to be light. The body reflects what the mind chooses. Only when you learn to control the mind can you control the body." In the beginning, Malik failed at nearly everything. His hands trembled, his footing was unsteady, and the pain of his emotional wounds showed in every misstep. But over the weeks, something began to shift. The anger that once consumed him was slowly replaced by something stronger: patience and mastery. The slaps and shoves he once endured became distant memories. He no longer felt small. His posture changed. His hands, once clenched in fear, now opened with quiet confidence. Zeke watched in silence, but his eyes carried a subtle pride. He knew Malik wasn't just learning how to fight. He was learning how to stand. And to Zeke, that mattered more than any technique or perfect strike. It was a regular day at school, or at least it was supposed to be. Kendra, as usual, sat in the back of the classroom, her poetry notebook open in her hands. Her fingers gently traced the pages, scribbling down words she never spoke aloud. Her poems were her refuge, the place where she could be herself, far from the jokes and the pain that followed her through the hallways. She was lost in her thoughts, in her words, when the sound of the door opening made her glance up. Trey, Dustin, and Kyle stood there, just like always, with eyes full of arrogance and smug superiority. Kendra was never hard to find, with her sweet and quiet demeanor, the very thing that made her an easy target. Did they see her as a threat? No. But she was easy fun. And for them, that was enough. Well, what do we have here? Trey sneered as he walked toward her desk. He grabbed her poetry notebook and with a quick flick tore out a page with a sharp rip, holding it up like a trophy. A poet, huh? What do you write in here, Kendra? Fairy tales and princess dreams? Kendra swallowed hard, feeling the heat of shame rush to her face. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "Leave me alone," she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by their laughter. They began reading her verses aloud, mocking the lines, twisting her words into cruel jokes, especially about her mother, who was hospitalized. Kyle's grin widened when her mother's name became their punchline. Malik was nearby, as he always was, quietly observing when the scene unfolded before him. He felt the pain twist in his chest, a knot tightening as their laughter echoed all around. He tried to walk away, but something inside him started to crack. This wasn't just humiliation. This was an attack on Kendra, on someone he loved, not this time. He couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. When Trey ripped the last page from the notebook, Malik felt rage surge through his veins. The pain in his chest burst open like a silent scream. He stepped forward, hands trembling, eyes locked on Trey. "Stop," he said, his voice strong and firm for the first time. What once was a whisper had become a command. The sound of his voice made everyone pause for a moment. "You don't have the right to do this to her," Malik continued, the fire in his eyes revealing something new. It was courage, something he had never fully felt before. But now, it was growing inside him, challenging the pain of his past. Trey looked at Malik, surprised by the shift. But instead of backing off, he stepped closer, a smirk curling on his lips. "Oh yeah, what are you gonna do? Hit me? Gonna show us how tough you are now?" Malik didn't answer with more words. He simply made a subtle motion with his hand, as if finally releasing everything he had been holding in. The others went quiet. But something in the air shifted. Something in Malik had changed. The silence he had always carried now had a new weight, the weight of a decision. Days passed, and with them, the atmosphere at school seemed to grow heavier. Malik could feel the shift, a rising pressure he could no longer ignore. The bullies had noticed his reaction, and although they hadn't approached him again, the tension lingered in the air. They watched him now from a distance, as if waiting for a reaction, a slip-up, a weakness. But Malik was no longer the same. His training sessions with Zeke had begun to shape him in ways he didn't fully understand, but could feel deep within. He no longer feared the taunts the way he used to. He didn't know when it changed, but now, when the bullies walked by, his heart still beat fast, not out of fear or rage, but because of something else, a quiet courage. The anger that once consumed him had transformed into discipline. Zeke often repeated in his lessons, "True strength comes from calm, not from explosion. When you learn to control your body, fear loses its grip on you." And yet fear still clung to Malik in unexpected ways. When he looked into the faces of his tormentors, he could feel the weight of their presence, like they were waiting for him to break. His body still trembled slightly, but not from weakness, from something else, something deeply human. He still didn't know how to deal with it. The fear of being humiliated again ran deep, like a shadow trailing his every step. During the night sessions, Zeke watched him in silence, letting the boy stumble, letting him get frustrated. "Fear will always be there," Zeke would say, voice steady and low. "But what you choose to do with it, that's what defines your path." Malik didn't know what more Zeke expected of him. The old man never demanded perfection. Quite the opposite. He taught that mistakes were part of the process. All he wanted was for Malik to keep moving, keep facing himself, keep rising. That night, Malik trained alone. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his muscles ached, but his spirit was beginning to grow stronger. He punched the air again and again, as if striking at something no longer there, the wounds of the past. But the truth was, he wasn't just reacting anymore. He was learning to channel his power, shaping it from the inside out. Malik's grandmother, always quiet, had begun to notice the change in her grandson. She didn't speak of it, but she knew. On the nights when he returned home late, she watched him from a distance, praying over him, not with words, but with her heart. There was something different about him now, something more grounded, more present. Still, despite all his progress, Malik hesitated. The real fight wasn't in the shoves or the slaps. It was inside him. He knew that one day he'd have to face the truth that haunted him, the weakness born from his own fear. And he was starting to understand that what kept him bound wasn't just the violence around him. It was what he believed about himself. And as he trained, his body seemed to accept the challenge. He was beginning to realize that every strike he threw into the air was also a blow against the fear that had ruled him for so long. The air at school was thick with a tension that was hard to ignore. Malik could feel the eyes of Trey, Dustin, and Kyle always lurking, now with a different kind of weight. They no longer attacked him physically, but something more dangerous was unfolding, something invisible yet devastating. Rumors. It was a subtle game of manipulation, an invisible weapon wielded by those who were used to staying in the shadows. They spread lies, and the words moved like wildfire, scorching everything in their path. Zeke, the quiet man, the steady presence who had given Malik strength, was now under attack. Not with fists, but with something far more destructive. Defamation. Rumors began to circulate like poison. "I heard that janitor has a criminal record. Got arrested for hitting a student," Dustin whispered in a corner of the hallway. "I've never trusted guys like that. Something about him always felt off." It was a lie. Zeke had never done any of that. But for boys desperate to regain the power they'd lost, words were enough. What they didn't realize was that, for Malik, this was a new kind of battle, more intense than any physical fight he had ever faced. Malik felt the crushing weight of injustice the moment he heard. Zeke's image was being twisted, and the school was starting to act as if the lies held truth. The administration summoned him, saying they were looking into the matter, but in reality it was clear. Zeke had become the target of an invisible attack. Teachers began to treat him with suspicion, and even some students started avoiding him, as if the lie had already rooted itself in their minds. Malik was stunned by the power of those words. The lie spread like ink on paper, staining the image of the man he had come to see as honorable. There was no denying it now. Zeke was under attack, and with him, everything Malik had fought to build within himself felt suddenly fragile, vulnerable. That night, lying in bed, Malik felt the pain of silence closing in on him again. He felt powerless. He couldn't let Zeke be destroyed like that. He couldn't allow everything they had built together to be tarnished by such a cheap, venomous lie. But doubt crept in. Was he alone in this fight? Did anyone else see what was really happening, or were they blind to the truth? And through all of this, Malik's grandmother prayed, as she always did. In silence, steady as a mountain, she sensed that her grandson stood at a breaking point. She didn't need to speak. Her faith had always been louder than words. But for Malik, now more than ever, something had to be done. He couldn't let the lies take over his life or Zeke's. The battle was just beginning. And this time, he knew he couldn't stay silent. Kendra couldn't take the pressure anymore. For weeks, she had watched Malik be humiliated in silence. She saw the bullies and their filthy jokes, the looks of contempt, the pain her cousin carried. But she also knew he would never speak up. He shut himself off, protected himself the only way he knew how, through silence. But now, with Zeke under attack, with lies spreading and poisoning the school, she knew staying quiet was no longer an option. She stood up from her usual spot in the cafeteria, where she often hid, and walked straight to the principal's office. Their grandmother, ever strong and silent, already sensed what she was about to do. It wasn't an easy decision for Kendra, but she couldn't let injustice win. Malik's silent suffering was her pain too. They were family, and she wasn't going to let the weight of a cruel world crush the people she loved. When Kendra arrived at the office, her heart was pounding. She was nervous, but a part of her knew there was no turning back. The principal, a serious man, usually unfazed, looked at her with quiet curiosity when she walked in. Kendra, her voice shaking, began to speak. Not only about what the bullies had done to Malik, but about what Zeke meant to him. She spoke about the man who, through his quiet presence, had given strength to a boy who was slipping away. She explained how the lies about Zeke weren't just unfair, they were dangerous. But what truly made the difference, what made the principal pause and listen, was what Kendra brought with her. She pulled from her bag a worn, folded copy of an old newspaper, its edges tattered, showing Zeke as a war hero, a decorated veteran, a man of honor and courage. It wasn't just proof of his past, it was a silenced truth, buried beneath layers of lies. I know what they're doing to him. I saw it. I heard it. He's not the monster they're trying to make him out to be. He's the man who gave us strength, the one who taught us how to fight with dignity, Kendra said, her voice now steadier, more resolved. The principal remained silent for a moment, eyes fixed on the paper in his hands. Kendra didn't know what he would do next, but she knew her truth needed to be heard. She wasn't asking for revenge, she wasn't demanding punishment. She was asking for justice, for Zeke's voice to be heard, and with his, the voice of Malik, and her own. That night, on her way home, Kendra felt she had done the right thing, but she also knew the battle was far from over. She didn't know what would happen next, but at least now the truth had begun to surface, and for her that was a start. The weight of silence that she and Malik had always carried was beginning to lift. Malik, lying in bed, thought about everything that was happening. He knew now that his cousin wasn't just a shy girl. She had become the voice he never thought he'd have, and that gave him strength. Something stirred inside him like a chain had finally snapped. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Malik felt ready to face it. The sound of the siren echoed in the distance, but inside the school, the tension was thick in the air. Malik felt as if with every step he took, the pressure increased. The bullies had backed off, but something still lingered. They were watching, waiting, looking for any excuse to strike again. And deep down he knew there was no turning back. The internal battle he had been fighting, against fear, against shame, was about to surface in a much more visible way. Next morning, something happened. Malik was walking down the hallway when one of the bullies, Kyle, shoved him again, harder than usual. Instinctively, Malik turned to respond, but a wave of tension froze him for a moment. It was as if time had slowed, as if the weight of every insecurity, every year of silence had collapsed into that one instant. But then he remembered Zeke's words. Control, Malik. Control. And for the first time, he didn't let fear speak for him. With a swift motion, Malik stepped back and blocked Kyle's next shove with precision. It was as if the anger had been transformed into something else, as if pain and fear now had purpose. He wasn't reacting with violence, but with control. The movement was smooth, but the power behind it was undeniable. Kyle looked stunned, unsure of what had just happened. The other students watching fell silent, unable to process what they had seen. Malik, fists still clenched, stared Kyle down with a firmness he had never shown before. He knew this scene was just a small confrontation, but to him it meant everything. It was a sign that the inner battle was turning. He was no longer the victim who suffered in silence. He was beginning to rise. Later, at the disciplinary assembly where the incident was discussed, Malik was nervous, but resolute. He was called to share his version of the story. The words that came from his mouth were clear and steady. I didn't want to fight. I'm not here to fight. I just want them to stop attacking me. I've been weak for too long. I won't stay silent anymore. The school board was divided. Some teachers believed Malik had acted appropriately. Others still saw him as a troublemaker, but Malik wasn't there to win anyone over. He wanted something simple, to be heard. He wanted the world to know he was no longer invisible. As he left the meeting, Malik still felt the weight of tension, but also a new lightness. Something inside him had shifted. He knew the fight was far from over, but he was no longer the quiet boy who let things happen without resistance. Now, he understood the real battle wasn't against others. It was against the fear that had always held him back. And somehow he was already beginning to win that war. The next day brought an uncomfortable stillness. The school felt suspended in the air as if it were waiting for the next move. Malik could feel the heavy stares on his shoulders, but something inside him had shifted. He knew that despite the looks and whispers, he had taken the first step toward becoming someone who no longer hid, and somehow that made him stronger than any blow ever could. Zeke had been reinstated at the school. The lie, once spread so widely, was beginning to unravel. The truth about Zeke, his accomplishments and honorable past, was finally being acknowledged. The school, which once regarded him with suspicion, now looked at him with newfound respect. But for Zeke, that wasn't the most important part. What truly mattered was seeing Malik stand. That day, Kendra stepped onto the school stage to read a poem. Her hands trembled, nerves running through her. But she knew this was the moment. She wasn't just speaking about her pain or her family. She was speaking about Malik, the boy she had watched transform, who found strength where there had once only been fear. Her poem, now more mature, more precise, was a reflection of what was happening inside her too. The one who learns to fight without harming, she said, eyes locked on Malik, who stood at the back of the room. He was no longer quiet, no longer invisible. He stood there with his head held high, showing everyone that despite everything, he had remained standing. Zeke, watching from a distance, felt a wave of emotion rise within him. There were no words for the pride he felt. He looked at Malik and something in his eyes lit up. This was the redemption he had been seeking. He hadn't just taught a boy how to fight. He had helped him discover his true strength, his true voice. And in doing so, Zeke had found his own redemption. More than ever, Malik knew he stood at a turning point. The school, the bullies, the challenges still ahead, they all seemed distant now. Because at last he had something he never had before, confidence. He understood now that what truly mattered wasn't the physical fight. What mattered was what he chose to do with what he had learned. And he had chosen, without hesitation, to stand tall. Kendra finished her poem, Malik's gaze fixed on her, like a silent promise between them. Their bond had never been built on words, but on a deep understanding that both had faced their own battles, and somehow had come out stronger. Applauded, Kendra stepped down from the stage, feeling the weight of expectation lift. She knew that just like Malik, she had learned to rise. The sound of rain tapping against the school windows echoed through the hallway, but inside the room there was a heavy silence. Zeke stood with his arms crossed, watching Malik with a serious expression. Malik stared back, his eyes more mature, more confident. He knew this moment was coming, the moment to make a final decision about who he was going to be from now on. At the school's last assembly, Zeke had been officially reinstated. The lie about his past had been exposed, and the truth about who he really was had begun to spread. But to Malik, what mattered more was the change he saw in himself. He was no longer the quiet kid, no longer invisible. He was someone who now stood tall in the face of hardship, someone who understood the power of silence, but also knew it was time to act. Zeke stepped closer and placed a firm hand on Malik's shoulder. "You don't need to be like me, Malik. You need to be better." The words, simple and direct, were a reminder that Malik's journey wasn't about copying someone else. It was about growing into his own. He had learned how to fight. Now, he needed to learn how to live with the choices he would make from here on out. With a steady gaze, Malik nodded. He knew the fight wasn't just in the school halls or in the hands of his bullies. The real battle was inside. The battle to keep growing. To become someone defined not by others' words, but by his own actions. He had learned to control his body. But now he needed to master his mind, his emotions. He needed to decide who he wanted to be. At that moment, Malik's grandmother, silent and strong as always, sat in a chair at the back of the room, watching everything with a quiet smile. She didn't need to say anything. She had always known Malik carried something powerful within. She was just waiting for him to see it for himself. He didn't need a grand revelation. He just needed to choose to live with courage. "I'm not afraid to be who I am anymore," Malik said, his voice steady. "I'm ready to live my life, not the way others expect, but the way I know is right." With that, Zeke handed him a new uniform, a symbol of change, but also of trust. "You're ready, Malik. Now it's your turn to help others." The look they exchanged said more than 1,000 words. It was the passing of the torch, the continuation of a cycle of growth that was only just beginning. Malik was no longer alone. He had found a strength that came from within, and his decision to live would be his greatest weapon. From the back of the room, Kendra watched him with a quiet smile. And the moment he took the uniform, she knew something had changed forever. It wasn't just about the bullies or the school. It was about Malik finally embracing his journey. She began writing in her notebook. "Sometimes, God hides warriors in simple clothes." Malik was ready to live, and that was his greatest victory. Malik is no longer the quiet boy, the one who used to hide behind pain and fear. He has learned that true strength doesn't come from shouting at adversity, but from standing tall even when the world tries to knock you down. Every step, every choice was a decision to live, to rise and fight, not against others, but against what had been holding him back from becoming who he truly is. Malik's journey is a lesson in courage, in choosing to live fully even when the scars seem too deep to ever heal. Looking back, Malik realizes it wasn't just the bullying, the beatings, or the lies that kept him trapped. He was the only one who held the key to his freedom. When he chose to face his fear and pursue the truth, he began to write his own story. And that story, once written by others, became entirely his. The pain he carried has now become his strength. And life, once a constant battle, has turned into a field of endless possibilities. Now the question remains, how far are you willing to go to write your own story? How many times have you stayed silent in the face of fear, pain, or injustice? Maybe just like Malik, you hold the power to change your path, to rise up and live the life you've always dreamed of. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because just like Malik, we all have the power to choose life and transform our reality.